Thank you very much, Tulerato. Vrystaat, well done. To all the students, very well done. It makes it very worthwhile, so thank you. I have a wonderful privilege today, somebody which I've seen now and then and have deeply admired through the impact that he's made. So he didn't want me to read it, but I am going to read it. Dr. John Volmink was born and raised in Cape Town, South Africa. He started his academic career at the University of the Western Cape, South Africa, where he studied mathematics and physics. He completed his PhD in mathematics education at Cornell University, and he returned to Southern Africa in 1990 after being a decade in the US. He started his career as a high school teacher, later held various university teaching positions, including positions at UWC, UCT, and Cornell University. After a brief stay in Botswana and Gaborone, he returned to South Africa in 1991 and immediately got involved in the development initiatives as the director of the Center for Advancement of Science and Mathematics Education in Durban. John has served as campus vice principal at the then University of Natal in Durban and later vice chancellor for partnerships at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in 2004. He has also been centrally involved in curriculum reform in post-apartheid South Africa and has been asked by all four ministers of education to play a leading role in the transformation of education in the new South Africa. Students, in my opinion, this is what a true reformist and transformer looks like. I'm sure he started as a very passionate student as well. He served for 4 years, from 2006 to 2010, as the chairman of the Umalusi Council, and is now serving his third term as the chair of that council. In 2016, he served as interim vice chancellor at DUT and as acting vice chancellor at CPUT in 2017. So when I said to you, I noticed him in the press, when there's big trouble, this is the man you call. Not the Ghostbusters, you call John Volmink. After 25 years away from Cape Town, he returned to and refurbished the house in Cape Town where he grew up. John and his late wife Angela, who was also a teacher, worked together in the community-based educational projects in Athlon's area with a focus on young people, and these days is involved in a project in Portugal on Ubuntu. John, it is a singular pleasure to listen to you.
Thank you, Francois. I want to start with an apology that I wasn't able to be here yesterday. I would have loved to, but I was at another conference on boys' vulnerability and masculinity and how these relate to broader issues such as sexual reproductive health and violence. But I'm here today and I've been inspired by the talks this morning, the presentations, and particularly with the students. You know, Nazima Mohammed was sitting next to me, and she had been at times Director for Transformation at WITS and also at UCT. And she said, after the students spoke, she says to me, "Doesn't this give you hope?" And indeed, students, if we ask myself, what kind of people would you like to see emerging from our universities, is precisely that. And I hope it has been captured on video or something. But we want, emerging from our institutions, people who are academically competent, but at the same time are independent, are confident, and who are environmentally respectful. And the list goes on. And so we can ask, and I believe that there's people in this room that help with producing a curriculum and a learning environment that will ensure that people like those that we've just seen emerge. But I have limited time, so I'm going to stick to my notes. And I just want to say that if there is time, and only if there is time, I will talk a little bit about my own journey as a student and in a family that otherwise would not have gone to university. I'm not sure I have the time, but let's see. What I want to start with is the fact that I have been the chairperson, that's why all these Umalusi banners are here. I've been, as Francois said, the chairperson of Umalusi since 2006, and I had a 4-year break, and I'm back there now. And I want to say that at the end of every year, I sign off a sheet in December, and it gives me a huge lump in my throat when I do that, because that's the sheet that contains the approval for the NSC results. And it affects hundreds of thousands of people. And 3 weeks before, for the 3 weeks before that point, we would have sat arguing with each other, people from different universities and other institutions, deciding whether we're going to adjust downwards or upwards or leave it the same. And if you adjust with that kind of numbers, anything by 1%, it affects tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people. But that's not the point. I signed that off, of course, once it is ascertained that there'd be no systemic irregularities. I sit and worry every year, and it will happen this year again. Although there's never been a time when I felt that the NSC examination lacked validity or integrity. I always wonder how the candidates that come through, armed with their certificates, how they will traverse life and how they will cope at universities. Now, we know that there was a huge jump in the numbers. So the number in 2008 for university entrance was 107,000. And last year it was 172,000. Now, most universities had accepted the senior certificate for years as the best predictor of academic success. At universities, but the introduction of the new qualification and the numbers made a lot of universities very nervous. And I might say not for good reason. So myself included, as a group, is a research forum chaired by Mary Metcalf. And we ask ourselves honest questions about this. And so in recent times, I have the study if any one of you are interested. We set up a study with a research question. Is there a relationship between the NSC results and academic success at higher education universities? So I will just go to that and just go to the findings because of time. The findings were troubling. Firstly, obviously, mathematical and natural sciences show that mathematics, as one can understand, and physical science has the strongest correlation with the GPA, and that in the social sciences and other non-numeric fields, that English is the strongest correlate with the GPA. Now, what is troubling is that physical science was the leading indicator in most, it doesn't matter law or whatever the case may be, it's physical science, even in areas where it's not required. So if you've done physical science, you can almost use that as a proxy of how you will perform. But in most faculties, there are no clear trends. There are no clear trends. And this last sentence is troubling, that although there's a correlation observed between NSC and the GPA, the correlation is of moderate strength. In other words, we can't make any great claims about it. And however, if you have an NSC with an average of 70% and higher, it does produce strong correlations. And it has implications of how we don't set the criteria for Umalusi has nothing to do with pass marks or bachelor or what it is, but we have to re-examine that. Now, I just want to point out that the NSC is essentially a school leaving certificate. Of course, it also has to do with further learning, but it's not primarily a university entrance examination. There are just too many factors, as you all know much better than I do, of what will assist anybody to succeed at universities. Having said that, though, I want to point out this graph. What I did was take the DHET report and take the data and plot it. I don't want to spend time. You've already seen probably something similar. But it shows that university graduation has increased by 15%, despite what I said. So it can't be because of the matric exam. It really has to do with other things. That over the years, you will see there, that goes from 2000 to 2010, in that period, the pass rate, the graduation rate, had increased by 15%. Now the interesting graph is this one, which also is just extracting from the DHET report. The graph compares the cumulative graduation and dropout rates over 8 years. 8 years because of the six-year qualifications, which was part of the study. And these are two populations. The one on the left has got to do with those that enrolled in 2000, and the one on the right, the second population, was enrolled in 2010. And the data followed them year on year. As snapshots over time, these two graphs show different trajectories for graduations and dropouts. The graph on the left shows that for students enrolled in the year 2000, over an 8-year period, there was a higher percentage of students dropping out than students who were graduating. I mean, you can see that on the graph. Although you can see that it began to narrow after 8 years. At the end of the 8-year period, 43.7% of the students graduated, and 47.3 of the students dropped out. So it's pretty close. The graph on the right, and that's the last graph we will be looking at today, but the graph on the right shows that for students who enrolled in the year 2010, the percentage of graduates overtook the percentage of dropouts. I'm very encouraged by that. And that happened within 4 years. However, we applaud ourselves in that regard. I have to say there had been gains, but let's not get too excited. We still have a long way to go. This is not something that we should celebrate. It's still worrying. Okay, let's move on. Now, you know, it turns out that about 30 years ago, I was part of the academic support program at UCT. In fact, I was a deputy chair under Ian Scott. So deputy director. And when I reflect on the lessons learned over those past 30 years, I can see how early notions of underpreparedness were mistakenly located in students themselves. It's a whole deficit thinking. And I just want to say this before I forget to say it. Some people have abandoned it because it's not politically correct. But if you deeply believe something, it will show again. It will come up again. So you have to allow, if you believe something and you see the evidence such as presented in this conference, you have to allow your beliefs to be washed away in a sea of anomalies. There's just too many anomalies to hang on to a belief that is intellectually and otherwise bankrupt. Also, that kind of thinking, because when you're locked into that thinking, and even in 2019, there are still some people who give uncritical allegiance to that way of thinking. And it comes through subtly. If you listen carefully, you'll see it's there. Because the first symptom is that you prescribe remedies because somebody is deficient or a group is deficient. And that kind of intervention has led to a very deep sense of alienation and exclusion felt by students who themselves felt targeted and profiled, racially profiled, as some of the students have said today. So, there has been a move from that to a new paradigm, and there is now an acceptance that way of thinking that was prevalent 30 years ago, we can't hang on to. That we now accept that not only students must change, I'm not saying students mustn't change, of course they must change. We all have to change. But institutions themselves need to change. And curricula must change. You know that we can spend the rest of the afternoon speaking about that. And there should be structural changes to qualifications. That attempt to change the structure of the qualifications in order to remove barriers of learning was sadly not very well received. And then there is the need to remove epistemological, to provide epistemological access. Now, when I talk about a new ecosystem, it's not the case that I'm suggesting a new ecosystem. I'm saying that we are beginning to think differently. We are using ecological thinking to move us away from where we were to where we should be. And it is certainly helpful to note, and I want to say that before I speak further about this ecosystem. If we just stopped before this, on that slide, we would have failed to recognize the silences in our discourses and the absence of a shared understanding of how to improve student outcomes. In fact, there are many great ideas around, and you'll pick it up here and other places, and how to achieve better student outcomes. But someone has said, and this is relating to the Siyaphumelela project, someone said, not with reference to the Siyaphumelela project, but it's generally true, that if you just have great ideas, and those great ideas is implemented without a clear and empirically verifiable understanding, an understanding of the needs of the intended beneficiaries, then those ideas will remain just that, just great ideas. So when I was the interim Vice-Chancellor at DUT, and I had the benefit of having wonderful people like Nikki Muller and Theo Andrew working with me, I got to learn firsthand about the Siyaphumelela program. And I was most interested to see how the discourse among the participating universities had changed. It wasn't the old speak, it was a different speak. When I went to the conference in Durban, I listened and it was totally different to what it was a decade or two ago. There was a renewed interest in how higher education institutions can use successfully data analytics to improve student outcomes, and how this thinking had been infused into the academic planning and institutional research, into ICT and student support division. Today, the discourse has changed, and it is said that you know that change has happened when that which was once exotic now is seen as normal. So the discourse that's happening here is seen as normal. But I can think of a time when it was exotic. You didn't talk like that. Yeah. So let's get back to this ecosystem. I just want to point out, I'm not going to go through the details of this. And given the time, I want to say that this ecological thinking recognizes interdependence and complexity. So it calls for collaboration, not top-down thinking, and it calls for courage to deal with the complexity. So let me just take the latter, complexity. This is what I listened to this morning. It's complex. The projects at Pretoria, the project at WITS are complex projects. And it would be wrong to come up with a simple answer that didn't engage with the complexity. None of us can live with complexity. So we want to move towards simplicity. But there are two kinds of simplicity. The simplicity on the near side of complexity. You haven't dealt with the complexity. You haven't engaged. That you call simplistic. And I've heard, not here, but many, many simplistic approaches to the complexity of higher education. There's another kind of complexity, which is on the far side, the simplicity on the far side of complexity. That is profound, and that is where we need to be and aim towards. I just want to say that we shouldn't become discouraged, even as a country. I'm not discouraged by what I read in the newspapers. It's part of dealing with complexity. It's part of dealing with the mess. And what we don't want to do is what happened 50 years ago when we came up with a set of simplistic answers that was never sustainable. Okay? So there are many internal elements. There are relational issues. One that's very important to me is student engagement. By student engagement, it's not just around academic issues. As a vice-chancellor or as a manager at a university, I see every opportunity to engage with students as an opportunity to develop leadership. I have a picture when I was at Natal, the old Natal University. The person sent it to me recently. He's sitting on somebody's shoulder, and he's the president of the SRC. And I'm standing behind him, and I'm quite relaxed about it. And that person, who was the source of terror to many, had spent enough time in my office that I could engage. And today, that person, and I'm sure he don't mind me saying that, is the MEC for Education in Gauteng. I just tell him, you see this gray hair, you gave it to me. So I think I've seen enough, many examples like that. So see it as an opportunity. And that is part of the paradigm shift. I think that for this space that we are in, before I forget to say so, I want to applaud the Kresge Foundation for helping shift our thinking, for rediscovering our courage to think big, and to rediscover our courage to tackle hard problems. That takes a lot of courage. So, while higher education is grappling with institutional challenges, dealing with the legacies of separation and inequity at all levels, the tension between access, massification, and quality, and the two education reality. There's not one education reality. And in an ecology, there are many positive things that can come out of that ecosystem, but there are also many fragilities. There are things that can get damaged. I call that a binding constraint. And none is, to me, as big as poverty. To get this country right, we're going to have to deal with that. And my friend Nick Spall has come up with this diagram, and I'm not going to spend too much time, but on the pyramid on the left shows that only 10% of people in this country participate in high productivity jobs, 55% in low productivity jobs, and 35% are unemployed. You can't have a country like that. So in America, that bottom thing is 6%, and they worry about that. None of us are falling off our chairs when we are told the unemployment rate is 35%. We should not lose our outrage about that. And we should break that vicious cycle in which many people are. So if you look at the right-hand side, if you're rich, you can access the best tuition at school, and you can access the best universities, and therefore you can participate in that high economic activity. But God help you if you're not. And the problem is, if you from the lower socioeconomic background, which is true for 80% of the people, when you're done, you either go to low productivity or you're unemployed, and if you have children, they go back where you come from. And that's a cycle that we need to break. And education holds the one hope to break that cycle. I'm almost done. Francois said he will tell me when I've got 5 minutes. He hasn't shown me yet. Okay, so this idea of poverty. What is poverty? Many people think about poverty as the absence of goods. But the definition that I like, or the view that I like, is that poverty is the inability to participate in society with dignity. That's a problem with poverty. And there are many kinds of poverty. Trevor Manuel spoke at my 32-year-old son's funeral about a year ago. And he says that he talked about the importance of relationships. You can also have a poverty of relationships. You don't relate to anybody. And he said that some people are so poor that the only thing they have is money. Yeah? But they're poor. I just want to say, when I go, and it doesn't matter which university I go to, there I see there's no poverty of aspiration. But I still continue to see a poverty of opportunity. And we have to apply our minds that and confront that and say to what extent it's true in our context. So, and people who are poor, they hope, myself, I mustn't say they because I'm also poor. I grew up poor. But poor people want to have everything that anybody else wants. And the same hopes and the same fears. And what students generally need to grow, whether you're rich or poor, are caring relationships. To be treated with respect and given equal opportunities. And if that's the only thing you aim for as a university, you're doing well. Thanks. And I think Mariki was the one that said this morning, it's not just support for the sake of support. It's support towards an end. And that end is to build resilience, to build self-esteem, to build character. And that can only happen in a balanced learning environment. I was going to speak about 2 case studies, but I've run out of time. So I've got 3 minutes left. So I was going to speak about how, even though other instances, whether they're higher education institutions or other entities, NGOs, how they're taking their bearing from the thinking in the Siyaphumelela. So it's making the country excited. And the examples I was going to give the time doesn't allow for that. So I'm going to go to my last slide. And it's got to do with it's got to do with the report I've just read. And the report, there aren't any more slides. I forget. Yeah. So the report I've just read is the Commonwealth report. And I just want to quote something from there. The Commonwealth report, the UNESCO Head of Education, Peter Wells, said in that report that inclusive quality higher education should leave no one behind. Quality higher education benefits not only individuals concerned, but has the potential to dramatically improve the lives of humankind. And I just want to say, because I'm not going to tell you the story, I'm writing my own life story. And it's called One Act of Kindness. And in one of the chapters, I deal with the fact that when I was doing my last year at school, I had abandoned my dream of going to university because I really was only interested in studying mathematics. I wasn't interested in studying anything else. And unfortunately, I had a prime minister who reminded me that I should know my station. And that is to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. That's one of the reasons. The other reason is there was no money in the family. So we were 7 kids. My parents were largely uneducated. And maybe I can just say this in one sentence. Somebody stepped into my life. You'll have to read my book to find out. But who changed. For him, it may have been a random act of charity. But for me, it was a defining moment. And he made it possible for me to go to university. I'm a very proud alum of UWC. Yes. I spent 4 of my academic years there. But after 2 years, I ran out of money and had to go and teach. That's why I was a teacher, to get money to complete. However, because of that, all my siblings began to see university as part of their possible self. So the next brother and my sister all went to UCT for various things. One is medicine, one is law, and so on. But the brother that's coming after me did much better than me. I ended up at Cornell. He went, after UCT as a doctor, he went to Harvard. From Harvard, he went to Oxford, and he's the dean of the medical school at Stellenbosch today. And that's because of that one act of kindness. And the most memorable moment in my family's life is when my mother came over to Cornell to be part of the graduation ceremony when I got my PhD. Then we went down to Duke, to North Carolina, Raleigh, where Peter, my other brother, who you saw on the Zondo Commission, he graduated with a master's in law. Then we went to Harvard. And my mother, my minimally educated mother, it was a special moment. For me, she was my support. In those years, UWC had no support. My mother was my support, even though she didn't understand anything. And today, not only my family had been affected, but I live back in the community where I grew up. And also, I play a role beyond the community, not just in this country, but in other countries. So you will never know what ripple, if you throw a stone in that water of student outcomes, student development, student success, you never know how it will end up. So keep up the good work, and thank you very much.
I can't think of a more fantastic way to end things. Any comment, any question? I have a very strong suspicion that John is underselling. Well, John, from our side, thank you so much. I hope he's an inspiration for you, and we'll bring the next session on. Please give him a round of applause.